A man in a Porsche refused to help a homeless woman, but when she shouted out his mother's name, he was stunned. The day began with a sunny morning that gave no hint of the coming storm. The sky over the city was clear, and only a gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the trees along the wide avenues. Michael Stevenson, the director of a thriving consulting firm, sat in his spacious office with panoramic windows overlooking the bustling streets of New York. Today was supposed to be another step toward the successful completion of a quarter filled with achievements. However, the morning turned out to be anything but ordinary. An unexpected message from the security service made his heart skip a beat. A notification flashed on his phone: unauthorized access attempt detected on company documents. All thoughts of the upcoming meeting vanished. It felt like a cold shower, abruptly pulling him back to reality after a calm night. The next few hours, Michael spent unraveling what had happened. The cleaning lady, Mary, who had been with the company for over 3 years and was trusted without reservation, was caught stealing trade secrets. It was a real blow. Mary was not just an employee, she was part of the larger corporate family. Many, including Michael, had shared personal experiences with her, met her outside of work at corporate events, and considered her, like he did, a mother figure, a nanny, a friend. She could have just come and asked for help, he said to his deputy, James, who was trying to console him. 3 years of trust, and this is what you get in return, he continued, unable to hide his disappointment. James was more pragmatic in his assessment. The important thing is that the situation is under control, and no one else was harmed. But yes, it's a lesson for all of us, he said, trying to find the right words of support. Michael felt that every mention of Mary was like a knife cutting into his soul. He remembered how she baked pies for her birthday, pies that reminded him so much of his childhood and his mother's pies. With these thoughts, Michael suddenly felt betrayed. This inner conflict led him to decide to leave early to cool down and collect his thoughts. Yes, it's confirmed, it was really her, he said into the phone as he was already getting into his Porsche. He was talking to his wife, trying to explain the inexplicable. I built this team like a family, and what came of it? We were trusted, and this is the result. On this day, filled with reflections and heavy emotions, Michael had no idea what lay ahead. He couldn't have imagined that fate was already preparing a meeting for him that would drastically change his life. Michael Stevenson closed the door to his office, shutting himself off from the restless world of corporate floors. Left alone, he walked to the window overlooking the alluring lights of New York. The city lived its life, unaware of the storm that had erupted in the soul of one man. Tears welled up in his eyes, unexpected and bitter, like the betrayal he had so recently experienced. The thought of Mary, the cleaning lady who had crossed all possible lines of trust, tormented him. How could a woman he had trusted implicitly betray him so easily? Michael was in unbearable pain at the thought that the betrayer had been so close, one of those he considered almost family. 3 years. He repeated to himself, as if trying to find an answer in those words. 3 years of smiles, conversations about children, discussions of weekend plans, even recipes for those very pies she baked for every corporate event. Michael couldn't believe it had all been just a mask, hiding a selfish goal. Now, standing by the window, he suddenly realized that his anger was mixed with pain, the pain of loss. The loss not just of an employee, but of a person who had been a part of his world. Michael reflected on how often he had trusted without hesitation, basing his judgments on personal impressions rather than cold calculations. He understood that business required toughness, but his nature always leaned towards creating warm, almost familial relationships within the team. But was it worth such a high price now? Michael's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. His wife's name, Laura, lit up on the smartphone screen. He struggled to shift his focus to the conversation with her. Laura knew him better than anyone and immediately sensed something was wrong. "Honey, are you okay? You sound strange," she asked with concern in her voice. "Yes, I'm fine, just tired," Michael replied reluctantly, trying to convince not only her but himself as well. "You always say that when something is wrong." "Remember, I'm here for you," she gently reminded him. His heart tightened with gratitude for her support, but also with the realization that Mary's betrayal had struck him deeper than he thought. It made him question his leadership principles, his methods of building relationships with people. "Maybe I really trusted people too much," he pondered. But without trust, there can be no true leadership. There can be no team willing to follow you through all the trials. That night, Michael didn't find answers to his questions. He spent hours staring at the sleeping city, where every light in the windows reminded him that life goes on despite betrayals and disappointments. And tomorrow he would have to return to work and look into the eyes of those who remained loyal to him. To find the strength to forgive and move on, maintaining faith in people despite everything. He stood alone in the elevator, slowly descending to the first floor. Around him was silence, broken only by the monotonous hum of the motor. Conversations from the day, the echo of betrayal that had thundered in his life like a bolt from the blue, still echoed in his mind. As he exited the building, Michael slowly walked to his car, parked in the shadow of towering skyscrapers. The cool evening air felt especially refreshing after the stuffy office. He got into the car but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he rested his head on the steering wheel, allowing himself a moment to feel the full weight of the fatigue and disappointment that had accumulated over the past hours. The decision to leave work earlier than usual was unusual for Michael, who always valued discipline and responsibility to his team. But today, he felt that he couldn't pretend that everything was okay. Not today, when his heart was so full of pain and doubts. On the drive home, Michael let his thoughts jump randomly from one memory to another. He remembered how on Mary's first day at work, she had brought him a cup of coffee just the way he liked it, without sugar and with 2 drops of milk. How she smiled at him, saying she remembered how everyone in the office preferred their coffee. These were small things, but they were the ones that created an atmosphere of trust and comfort. Today, however, these same memories seemed like something else, from another life. Arriving home, Michael slowly got out of the car. He stood for a few minutes at the front door, taking deep breaths of the cold air. Inside, his wife was waiting for him, and she would undoubtedly sense his unease and try to help. He knew the upcoming conversation would be difficult. Laura had always known how to support him, but today, Michael realized he needed it more than ever. When he entered, Laura was already waiting for him in the living room. She looked at him with concern, seeing the shadows of fatigue and stress on his face. "You're home early," she said softly, approaching him and embracing him. Michael hugged her back, feeling the tension begin to leave his body. He sank onto the couch, and they sat down together. Words weren't necessary, their presence alone spoke volumes. But he knew he would soon have to explain everything. "I don't know what to do, Laura," he began, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "How do I rebuild the trust that was lost? How do I start believing in people again?" Laura listened, nodding and occasionally squeezing his hand. Her eyes were full of empathy and understanding. "We'll find the answers together, Mike," she said quietly. "We always do." In that moment, Michael realized that despite all the losses and trials, he wasn't alone. With her support, he could get through anything, restoring what was lost, step by step. After the conversation with Laura, Michael Stevenson decided he needed a distraction. He got into his Porsche and headed to one of the city's shopping malls, intending to pick out a gift for his wife. The evening chill pleasantly enveloped him after the day's hustle and stress. The city lights, flickering through the glass, created the illusion of a starry sky, which soothed him a bit. Michael parked his Porsche in the spacious lot of the shopping mall and headed towards the entrance. His steps were heavy, but the determination to find something special for Laura gave him strength. He walked through the brightly lit corridors, stopping at jewelry store windows, until he chose a delicate silver necklace with a sapphire, Laura's favorite stone. As he was leaving the mall, pleased with his choice and a few other purchases, his gaze fell on an elderly woman sitting by the entrance. She was dressed in worn-out clothes, and her face bore a mask of fatigue and need. Michael slowed his pace. "Young man, could you spare some change for bread?" she asked quietly, looking up at him. The man looked the woman up and down. There was something almost comical about this small, frail vagrant. What if this is the future awaiting our cleaning lady? What if she gets convicted and serves real time? While she's in prison, her irresponsible son will definitely sell her apartment, and she'll be begging on the street just like this. No one will hire her with a criminal record, especially for something like this, and she'll be begging for bread until she freezes to death somewhere under a fence. These thoughts whirled through Michael's mind, bringing him back to the mundane reality. But on the other hand, why should I pity these people? I gave them a job, paid them well, wasn't stingy, gave out bonuses. And they betrayed me, stole from me, and now I even feel sorry for them. I won't give you any money, the man said to the beggar. I don't know what happened to you or what's going on in your life, and I don't care to know. It's none of my business. But I believe you deserve what you have. You made your life this way, and now you're responsible for your own fate. The woman squinted slyly. It was clear that the words of this well-dressed man had struck a nerve. Then, she looked a bit more closely into his eyes and gasped. Aren't you the son of Eleonora, who lived in that big white house on 37th Street? Your eyes are very similar to hers. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. It was as if he had gone into a stupor. How do you know my mother? He asked, feeling a mix of confusion and anxiety overwhelm him. The woman smiled, and there was something uniquely warm in her smile. Your eyes, they look so much like hers. Michael didn't know what to do. On the one hand, the woman clearly needed help, but on the other, the knowledge about his mother was too intimate for a random passerby to know. Yet, he felt he couldn't just walk away. Can we talk? He hesitantly suggested, putting down his bags and inviting her to sit on the nearest bench. Tell me, how did you know my mother? As they walked to the bench, there was a sense of something extraordinary beginning to unfold before Michael. He felt that this encounter could change his life, and a part of him, buried deep within, was already starting to realize it. On a street filled with shoppers in front of the mall, silence seemed impossible. But when the woman uttered that name, the air around thickened, and Michael felt time stand still. Eleonora, the name of his mother, which he never expected to hear from a stranger, especially not in a place like this and under such circumstances. How do you know Eleonora? He asked again, unable to hide his astonishment and growing anxiety. The woman slowly sat down on a bench, staring at Michael with piercing eyes that held something mysterious and uncannily familiar. Many people who were in the places where you and I grew up know about Eleonora. She was known for her kindness, and yes, I knew her personally. Very personally, she said slowly, each word seeming to bring back memories shrouded in the fog of time. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The woman continued. Your mother was more than just an acquaintance to me. We were like sisters, sharing everything, until tragedy separated us. But she always spoke to me about you, Michael. About how you were growing up, your achievements. She was so proud. Michael sat next to her, trying to piece together the fragments of this unexpected puzzle. Why have I never heard of you? Why did my mother never mention you? His voice tinged with sadness and disappointment. There are things we prefer to hide even from those closest to us, to protect them, or to protect ourselves, she replied quietly, smiling evasively and looking away. You know, Michael, life is full of secrets, and sometimes the truth is heavier than lies. Their conversation was interrupted by passers-by, and for a moment, Michael was distracted, watching their hurried figures. When he turned back to the woman, he noticed her sigh heavily, as if preparing for a long journey. I must go, she said, slowly rising. But before I leave, Michael, know this. Your mother loved you more than anything in the world. And she always wanted only happiness for you. Michael silently watched her, trying to decide whether to believe the woman's words. He felt she was leaving him with more questions than answers. But something in his heart told him that every word she said was true. Wait, he stopped her. Don't go yet. Tell me more. Please. She stopped, turned, and looked at him with an inscrutable expression. We will meet again, Michael. When the time comes. Your mother always said that everything has its time. And with those words, she slowly walked away, leaving Michael sitting on the bench, puzzled and filled with unresolved feelings and questions that he felt were just beginning to unfold before him. Michael stood on the sidewalk, watching the woman's figure recede, each step echoing the unresolved mysteries of his own past. His mind swirled with a whirlpool of thoughts and memories, many of which he had long buried in the darkest corners of his consciousness. He tried to understand how a woman he had never seen before could know so much about his mother, Eleonora. Michael slowly made his way back to his car. The entire drive home, he thought only about what he had learned. He decided that he needed to learn more about his mother's past, for there might be secrets in his family that he had never suspected. At home, Laura was waiting for him, and he knew he would have to share everything that had happened with her. Upon arriving home, Michael found Laura in the living room. She was reading a book but immediately closed it when she saw his face. "Michael, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with concern in her voice. Michael sat next to her on the couch, took her hands, and began telling her about his encounter with the mysterious woman. He told her how she mentioned his mother and the feelings it stirred in him. Laura, she knew Mom. She spoke about her as if they were close. But I've never heard of her from Mom. It's so strange. What other secrets were kept in the past? Laura listened attentively, then quietly asked, "What are you going to do?" "I have to find out more. I think I'll start by searching through Mom's old photos and letters. Maybe there, I'll find some clues." The next morning after breakfast, Michael went up to the attic where old family things were stored. Dust covered the old boxes and suitcases that hadn't been touched in years. The light streaming through the small window illuminated thick layers of cobwebs. Michael began carefully opening each box, cautiously sorting through the contents. Among the various items, he found an old photo album. He sat down and carefully opened it. Page by page, faces from the past looked back at him, many of which were familiar. And there, on one of the pages, he saw a photograph of his young mother, laughing and happy, in the company of another woman he had never seen before. On the back was written, "Eleonora and Joan, summer 1965. Joan," he whispered to himself. He glanced at the vagrant woman's photo on his phone. There could be no doubt, it was her. Michael spent the morning in total confusion. After the discovery that led him to the old album found in the attic, his thoughts kept returning to that amazing woman, Joan. He couldn't shake the feeling that every step taken in his family's past somehow predetermined his own steps. Deciding that he needed to take action, Michael drove into town. The parking lot was crowded, but he found a spot near the entrance to a large shopping center where he hoped to find something that could help him in his search. Perhaps books on the history of the town or even archival records available in large bookstores. As he entered the mall, Michael felt like he was diving into another world, a world where the past mixed with the present, creating a mosaic of possibilities for discovery. He first headed to the bookstore, which spanned 2 floors. The cool air, filled with the scent of fresh print and coffee from the adjacent cafe, slightly calmed him. Michael approached the history section, his eyes quickly scanning the titles. History of New York, Untold Stories, Secrets of Old Streets, each book seemed like a call to new discoveries. He pulled out several volumes that seemed the most promising and settled down to read in a secluded corner of the store. Page by page, he searched for mentions of his mother or Joan, of the large white house that might hold the key to the past. But as the hours passed, the answers remained as elusive as shadows in the fog. Finding nothing concrete, Michael decided to change tactics. He approached the section with maps and old city photographs. Perhaps visual materials would help him better understand where to look for traces of the past. As he browsed through the old maps, he tried to imagine how the cityscape had changed, which houses once stood where the current buildings were. After several hours of fruitless searching, Michael felt tired and frustrated. He sat, staring at one of the old maps, when suddenly his eyes fell on a familiar corner, the area where, according to Joan, his mother's house stood. The map had a note about a library that existed in those days. Maybe there are archives or even old newspapers that can tell me more, he thought. With renewed hope in his heart, Michael left the store. Despite his fatigue, he felt a surge of energy. He knew there was still much work ahead, but every detail, every piece of the past he could gather, brought him closer to understanding the mysteries that had long remained unsolved. He was ready to continue his search, knowing that each new day could bring the answers he so longed for. It was drizzling, a fine, persistent rain, when Michael found Joan at her usual spot by the entrance to the mall. She was sitting on a wet bench, wrapped in an old blanket, her tired face telling of many hardships endured. His heart ached at the sight of her. "You knew my mother, didn't you?" His voice trembled with emotion. The woman slowly raised her head and nodded, her eyes filled with sadness, deep and burdened with memories. Michael felt that before him was the key to his past, to a part of his life about which he knew nothing. But before he could dive into a sea of questions, the woman stood up, dusted herself off, and was already about to leave, turning into the nearest alley. "Wait!" Michael called out to her. He couldn't let her leave just like that, not now, when he was so close to answers. "I'll buy you any groceries you want, but clarify things for me. Tell me how you knew my mother." "You're not lying, are you?" the woman asked with a sly smile. "Groceries first, then we talk." With that, they headed to the nearest grocery store. Michael noticed how she brightened up when they entered the seafood section. "Are these oysters fresh?" she asked, pointing to the ice where the shells glistened. The seller, clearly embarrassed by their presence, replied, "They're fresh, delivered just today, but their price, it's a bit steep." "Well, be careful, if you're lying, I'll bite you myself. In the meantime, weigh a dozen." "He's paying," she said, waving her hand toward Michael, as if doing him a favor by letting him pay for her. "You asked for bread," Michael smiled, watching her choice of groceries, which revealed a person with refined taste. "You know, appetite comes with eating. Don't be stingy." "You said, I'll buy everything." "So pay up," she said, choosing only quality products. She knew a lot about brands, wines, and cheeses, which surprised Michael. "You don't seem like someone who's lived off the streets your whole life, more like someone who's dined in restaurants. How do you know the names of these wines and cheeses?" "I don't even know all of what you picked," Michael asked in surprise. "Life is long and not always predictable. I never could have imagined things would turn out this way. There was youth, beauty, worthy men, and plenty of money, and look how it all ended," she said, finishing her shopping. After paying at the checkout, they decided to have a meal. When they sat down at a table in the restaurant, the woman ordered herself a glass of champagne, and Michael finally mustered the courage to ask her the questions that had long weighed on his mind. "So, how did a woman with such taste end up on the streets?" "It's a long and instructive story, my boy," she replied condescendingly and began a tale that Michael was about to hear. "Your mother was my light in the darkness, in our shared youth," she began, and her voice gradually grew firmer. "I was born into a modest family, where every day was a challenge, but studying always brought me solace. In school, I was the top student, the one everyone looked up to." She paused, as if flipping through the pages of her memory. "Music, art, literature, these were my refuge from the drabness of daily life. I played the piano as if every note could change the world around me, sang so beautifully that even birds would stop mid-flight to listen, and I painted, trying to capture the beauty of the moment." Michael listened, captivated and absorbed by her words, opening a new chapter in the story of his mother. "But then everything changed," Joan continued, her eyes dimming with memories. "When I was 15, I fell in love. He was 3 years older than me, handsome, with a rebellious heart full of dreams and a soul yearning for freedom. But his life was full of chaos and unpredictability. My parents always told me that I would achieve something great, that my talents would open up a world of opportunities. However, when I became pregnant, it turned out that all the bridges were burned. My future, which seemed so bright, suddenly dimmed." Joan stopped to catch her breath. "My lover didn't want a family, he wasn't ready to be a father. As events unfolded, it became clear that my career was over. My condition with the child meant giving up all my dreams and ambitions. When I realized that an abortion was no longer an option, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life." Her voice trembled almost inaudibly with suppressed emotion. Michael watched her intently, each of her words adding weight to the story he was just beginning to understand. "And what did you decide?" he asked quietly. Joan slowly raised her eyes to Michael, her gaze filled with sadness and determination. "I decided to keep the child, you, Michael. And that decision led me to your mother, Eleanor, who helped me more than anyone could have imagined." When Joan sat in the tense silence that hung in the air after the news of her pregnancy, she felt as if the walls of their house were closing in around her. The scandal erupted with ferocious intensity. Her father, always a strict and principled man, was on the verge of fury. He shouted, threw objects, and threatened to put her lover behind bars for seducing a minor. His voice echoed through every corner of the house, causing Joan to shrink in fear and despair. Her mother, who had always strived to maintain peace and balance in their home, seemed to have lost her last bit of strength. She poured herself valerian, trying to calm her nerves, her eyes full of tears and despair as she watched her only daughter's life unravel. Joan's elderly grandmother, observing all this chaos, suggested the only solution she believed could save the family's honor. At a family council, where the tension was palpable in every fiber of their beings, she quietly but resolutely said, "We need to send my wayward granddaughter to our distant relatives in the village. Let her give birth there, so as not to create further gossip and rumors. After she gives birth, we'll decide what to do next." The decision was final. With a heavy heart and a deep sense of loss, Joan went to the village, where she spent the final months of her pregnancy. Away from home, in a simple country house, she gave birth to a healthy, strong baby who instantly became the light of her life. When they returned to the city, their fate was already sealed. Joan and her baby were brought home late at night in a car to avoid any gossip. Her mother met them at the doorstep, hugged her, and offered some tea. Exhaustion and relief mixed into one feeling as Joan drank the tea and almost immediately fell asleep from fatigue and emotional exhaustion. When she woke up at dawn, the bed beside her was empty. In a panic, she began searching for her son, begging her parents to tell her where he was. But the entire family remained silent, as if they had swallowed their tongues. Only her grandmother, sitting nearby, held her hand tightly and quietly asked her not to worry. "Your son is better off where he is now," she said. "And you, my dear, have a chance to study and build a career again. Don't let this trial break you." These words, though spoken with love, left a deep wound in Joan's heart that could not heal, filling her life with bitterness and unceasing questions about the fate of her firstborn. After this incident, Joan's life was irrevocably changed. Outwardly, she was still the same smart and beautiful woman, but inside, she was torn apart by fear and hopelessness. The career her parents had envisioned for her remained an unattainable dream. Instead, she spent days and nights wandering the city streets in a desperate attempt to find any trace of her son. She peered into every stroller passing by, hoping to see familiar features, stood vigil outside the clinic on days when newborns were brought in. There was a glimmer of hope in her eyes that grew fainter and more desperate with each passing day. In the evenings, as she returned home, she felt her heart tighten with bitterness and resentment. "I'm starting to go mad," she once confessed to her friend. "I wake up at night and jump out of bed because it seems to me that my son is crying somewhere. I've stopped eating, studying, living. All I need is to find him, hear his voice, make sure he's safe." This state of anxiety and distress was so intense that even her parents, who had tried to stay out of her madness, could no longer remain silent. Watching their daughter's torment, they finally confessed. They admitted that they had found a lonely woman who had long dreamed of having a son. This woman was educated and wealthy, ready to offer the child everything he could ever wish for. For the baby, she paid them $100,000, the money deposited into Joan's account. "Why did you do this?" Joan asked faintly, feeling her heart stop from the betrayal. "We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. You were too young to take on such responsibility, her mother replied softly, trying to hug her daughter, who immediately recoiled from her. You sold my son as if he were just an object, Joan exclaimed, feeling the anger and resentment shake her. It's for your college. Isn't that great? With your knowledge and talents, you'll be able to make something of yourself, and your baby is living in a wealthy home, loved and cared for. When he grows up, he'll also be able to get whatever education he wants. You could never give him that yourself. This is better for everyone, Joan's mother said, but her words sounded more like an attempt to justify her actions than genuine concern for the well-being of her daughter or grandson. Joan felt as though each word was cutting into her soul. The pain of losing her son mixed with the bitterness of betrayal, and her heart filled with despair. She still couldn't understand how a mother's love could take such a turn. Her mother shook her head, trying to find the right words to comfort her daughter, but at that moment, understanding and acceptance were unreachable. The conversation ended in tears and shouting. Joan realized she could no longer stay in this house, where every wall reminded her of the betrayal. She decided that she had to start over. Leaving everything behind, she set out on a journey to find her son, despite the uncertainty and fear of the unknown. Years later, standing face to face with a vagrant whose gaze was familiar and warm, Michael first learned the truth about his origins. Yes, you are my son. But I certainly don't claim the title of Mother of the Year, the woman said with a smile that shone through years of suffering and loneliness. Michael felt his world collapse and rebuild itself at the same moment. Emotions overwhelmed him, and he couldn't find the words to express everything that had been building up in his heart over all these years. His confusion was obvious, but inside, hope began to grow, hope for a new beginning, for a chance to understand and accept his story, his mother, his life. So if you had money, 100,000 is still a lot even now. How did you end up on the streets? Michael asked another question, his voice sounding anxious. The woman sitting across from him seemed surprisingly calm. I didn't spend it, she began, and her eyes darkened for a moment with memories. Do you remember, 5 years ago, there was a crisis in your company, and then some benefactor donated $100,000. Michael was shocked and didn't know what to say. He could never have imagined that such dramatic events were happening behind the scenes of his own business. The woman, meanwhile, continued speaking, her voice growing even softer, as if she feared disturbing the fragile balance of the moment. I only found out that you were alive, healthy, and living on 37th Street 5 years after you were born, and even then, it was purely by chance. Her gaze became pensive. I don't know if you remember, but one day I was strolling through the city streets, and you almost knocked me off my feet. She smiled and winked at him, recalling that day. You were still very young then, and when you ran into me, you fell down, tore your shirt, and scraped your arm badly. Michael tried to recall that moment, but everything was too hazy. However, he began to connect the dots in his past, starting to understand that fate had intricately intertwined their lives long before this meeting. You were my little hero, she continued. And although I knew I had to stay away, my love for you never faded. Every day spent away from you was a trial. Michael looked at her, a flicker of understanding, and perhaps the beginning of forgiveness, appearing in his eyes. A thought began to form in his heart, that despite all the hardships, they might be able to start anew, this time as mother and son. Michael gazed at the woman, trying to process every word she said. I don't remember the details, but I do have a childhood scar on my arm, right above my birthmark. His voice was uncertain as he slowly raised his arm to show her the small scar. Yes, that's right. The woman smiled, her eyes lighting up as she recalled the moment. I was so scared for you then. I helped you up and wanted to clean your wound when I saw your birthmark. That's how I recognized you. I was in shock. So many years of searching, and then you just ran into me. I was in a daze, and you quickly ran off somewhere. Her voice trembled with emotion as she remembered that day. I found the woman who became your mother, she continued, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. But by that time, you were already very attached to your new mom, and I didn't have the strength to separate you two. Your mother and I became very close friends," the woman sighed. "She helped me get a job at a very exclusive restaurant. She taught me about wines and cheeses. We talked on the phone every day, and she would tell me how you were doing. Her only condition was that I never see you, and you never see me. She didn't want to traumatize you and preferred that you didn't know the truth. She would tell me that I would meet a worthy man, get married, and with my talents, conquer the world. But that never happened." Her voice grew sad again. "When my parents passed away, it turned out they had left a lot of debts. The apartment was taken, and I ended up on the street. I went to your mother's home, but she had passed away too." The woman's voice shook. "For a while, I drank, and it wasn't champagne. It was something much worse. I lost my job. All my friends and former lovers turned their backs on me." A spark appeared in her eyes as she recalled, "And today, I met you, and when I saw your eyes, I immediately knew who you were. Your father had the same eyes, and I fell in love with him because of them. Looking into them, I couldn't say no to him." Michael listened, unable to look away, feeling his heart filled with pain and compassion for the woman he had just met, but who had been a part of his life much longer than he could have imagined. Michael tried to process the flood of revelations that had come crashing down on him. He felt his world turn upside down. Learning that he was the son of a woman who had lived on the streets was too much, even for his heart, accustomed as it was to challenges. Moreover, this woman, whom he had just begun to rediscover as his mother, had sacrificed everything for his well-being. It was an act of unparalleled maternal love. She had given all her money to support his company in a critical moment. So, this is what a mother's heart is like. "You know, I fired a cleaning lady today who tried to steal secret information about our company to protect her son. He was in debt, and she agreed to it to prevent him from being killed or hurt," Michael said, mixing the feelings of generosity and betrayal he had previously felt toward his employee. "You know, mothers are capable of anything for their children. Stealing isn't the solution, of course, but to protect her child." Joan looked into his face, seeking understanding. Michael hesitated, recalling his reaction to the cleaning lady's actions. "But couldn't she just come to me and ask for money?" His voice trembled with mixed emotions. "Are you sure about that?" Joan asked cautiously. "I could have spent all the money back then, and then, when I ended up on the streets, I could have come to you and said, 'Hello, son.' But I couldn't allow myself to do that. I chose to return all the money to you when you needed it and pretend to be a secret benefactor, even though I was in great need myself at that time." Her words made Michael think. You really can't get inside another person's head. He had never faced a choice like the one these two women, his mother and the cleaning lady, had to make, both confronted with unbearable decisions for the sake of their children. "Don't judge her too harshly," his mother added quietly. Michael studied her face, lined with the wrinkles of time and hardship, and felt a new feeling filling his heart, empathy. Sitting there, next to the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, Michael realized that his journey toward acceptance and understanding was only just beginning. He reflected on how much he still didn't know about life, about sacrifices, and about what it truly means to love and be loved. Sitting next to his mother in the restaurant, Michael realized that his perspective on the world was beginning to change. The revelations about the past and the uncovering of secrets that had been hidden from him for many years forced him to reassess many things, including his principles of managing his business and relationships with people. That very day, Michael decided he would start adopting new approaches. First, he promised himself that he would find the dismissed cleaning lady and try to help her and her son overcome their financial problems. He realized that simply firing people for their mistakes wasn't the solution. They needed a chance to make amends and receive support. The next day, Michael began searching for the woman. It took some time, but fortunately, with the help of social media and his employees, he found her and met with her and her son. Explaining the situation and expressing his sincere desire to help, Michael offered her the opportunity to return to work and provided financial support to help her family get out of debt. Inspired by these changes in his life, Michael also decided to change his approach to managing the company. He started implementing a support program for employees that included financial planning consultations, psychological support, and professional development opportunities. Michael realized that creating a supportive and caring work environment not only benefited employees, but also increased productivity and loyalty to the company. Meanwhile, his relationship with his mother continued to improve. They met often, discussed various topics, shared memories, and made plans for the future. Michael learned a lot about his past, about his parents, and about the hardships his mother had endured to secure his future. One day, sitting in a cafe on the corner of the very street where they had met for the first time after many years apart, Michael and his mother decided to create a foundation to help single parents and their children. Michael knew that his business and resources could help many people who faced challenges similar to those his mother had once encountered. The project took off, and within a short time, they were able to help dozens of families. Michael felt that he was on the right path, and each new day brought him the satisfaction of knowing that he was making the world a better place. Now, he was not only a successful businessman, but also someone who cared about the well-being of others. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.